Hello and welcome to Borzoi Cast, a show about culture in the context of philosophy, history, and economy. My name is Arvi,
And I'm Alina.
and today we're going to be talking about Under the Silver Lake. We liked it back in 2018 when it first got released with very little fanfare and to actually critically divisive response, I would say. Yeah, a lot of people didn't like it when it initially premiered. I remember seeing a review from Mark Kermode at one point, and it was like baffling how negative the response was generally. And like to this day, you can see this on like Letterboxd and elsewhere. It's quite a divisive movie.
Such a deeply misunderstood movie that, as far as I understand, also cost the director his career, which is a shame.
Apparently, so the director David Robert Mitchell previously did It Follows, which was kind of a hit.
Yeah, it was, especially because horror movies of such caliber and such scale were not that easy to pitch and approve with studio management. So this was really a breakthrough. And after It Follows, it became so much easier for other movie directors to do something of a blueprint there.
And It Follows was 2014, and then Under the Silver Lake got picked up by A24 for distribution, and I don't know the details about like how much were they involved in the actual production, but I remember the release for Under the Silver Lake was kind of fumbled a bit, right? There wasn't a lot of marketing push. It was delayed at some point. It was
I think
kind of
it was
weird.
even a surprise that we found out about it and watched it.
Yeah, I watched the trailer. I remember the trailer giving a very almost like a comedic tone. And the movie has some comedy, I would say. It has some funny question mark moments. It has some, amusing moments, that's for sure.
But this is actually a neo-noir movie. And after I watched it for the first time, I came back to it in my mind quite often. I was thinking about certain scenes that we're going to talk about today that were just not letting me go, which is interesting.
Yeah, Under the Silver Lake, like you said, neo-noir film starring Andrew Garfield and Riley Keough.
Yes.
And in short, it's a movie about a guy played by Andrew Garfield who is like a bit of a slacker. He's a bit of a bum. He's short of on his rent. He's living in LA, and all he's doing is like, I don't know, drinking coffee, playing video games, hanging around, having a very questionable relationship with kind of sort of girlfriend.
And we also see that he's more interested in conspiracy theories and hidden messages in popular culture and absolutely uninterested in paying his overdue rent. So he's about to get evicted. There's also some sinister background context. There's a dog killer who is murdering pets in the neighborhood. So we see a lot of graffitis over walls, windows, and stuff. And at some point, Sam meets his new neighbor Sarah, who, despite having caught him spying on her, invites him over, and the two get high and watch How to Marry a Millionaire with Marilyn Monroe. But when her roommates interrupt as they begin to kiss, Sarah suggests that Sam leaves and they hang out the next day.
Yeah, and like overall, they spend quite a sweet evening together.
But a really short time.
Really short time. This is just like a nice hanging.
One thing that stands out is that Sarah is exceptionally beautiful, and the way she's lit in the movie tells you that this is the girl of his dreams. Yeah. Not the one that he's having relationships with, who is an actress, actually, and we will get to know that Sarah also tried to get into the industry, I guess. But this is the girl, so he's very set on trying to get in relationship with her.
And so the next morning, we come to find out that inexplicably, the girl, Riley Keough,
and her roommates,
and all her roommates seemingly moved out overnight. They're gone. They're like without a trace.
And Sam becomes obsessed with learning what happened. He also notices a strange symbol painted on the apartment's wall, which leads him down the rabbit hole of deciphering hidden messages.
Hidden messages, hidden societies, conspiracies, and all that jazz, set against the backdrop of LA movie industry, music industry, pop culture, and all that.
And so after that, Sam also sees a woman who is picking up some leftover stuff from the apartment where Sarah lived. He trails her, and this leads to a series of Hollywood parties where he encounters the pop band Jesus and the Birds of Dracula. Actually, their songs are pretty good. And different performance artists, for example, actresses that are working in prostitution because they're struggling. Then Sam sees a news report detailing the discovery of billionaire Jefferson Sevens burned to death in a car with 3 women. And Sam recognizes Sarah's hat at the scene, and a small dog similar to Sarah was found dead. At the same time, Sam contacts the author of Under the Silver Lake comics, pretty underground and niche. That guy, who is also completely paranoid, tells him more about different conspiracies. The dog killer, the Owl's Kiss, a naked woman in an owl mask who seduces and kills people in their sleep, and other different messages in pop culture. And he believes that they are all part of the same conspiracy. Later, the police find the author dead in an apparent suicide. Sam enters the house and he reviews the security footage because the guy had like hidden cameras in his house. And he sees that the author was killed by a woman dressed as the Owl's Kiss. So a lot of creepy stuff is really happening, and we will try to understand which of it is true and false. One thing that I'd like to mention is the movie itself operates on such a meta level, starting even from the poster. So if you would take a look at the movie poster, you would see different hidden images inside that have significant meaning to the story plot. And the movie itself does to your brain exactly what the story events do to the brain of Sam. It tries to get you to decipher the meaning, what's behind it. And not all symbols have some prolific meaning or something. But one of the things that stood out, for example, is that Sam and Sarah, names combined together, make a Sanskrit word samsara that means wandering or running in circles, which is already pretty fun.
The actual deep dives into the meaning behind various different symbols inside the movie can be fun, but also I feel like they're distracting. I don't think that they're actually the point, which might be a bit unintuitive, right? Because I think one of the things that the movie is trying to show us through Sam's obsession with symbols and finding hidden meaning and conspiracies, etc., is that it almost feels like he's using this activity as a substitute for authentic, real connection. He's much more willing to go search for some unhinged conspiracy rather than building relationship with his girlfriend. Or he has like a friend, question mark, played by Topher Grace. We're going to talk about him too. But like, yeah, a lot of the people who are really, really into Under the Silver Lake, like people on Reddit and all of that, who are still like digging into more meaning and connections and trying to make the sense of all of this, I think they're also sort of missing the forest for the trees in a way. Because yes, it is fun to look at all the hidden clues and all of that. And part of this does really create meaning in a way that it creates a theme, or rather several different themes throughout the movie. However, there are also these clues that are meant to just throw you off and just keep digging more just for the sake of it. Again, samsara, right? Wandering. It's there just to make you get lost in this.
That's the beauty of this film. Again, this meta level that makes you so relating to the character you may not necessarily like, but at least you understand how their brain works because your brain works the same way. The conspiracy culture in modern paranoia and this anxiety and meaning making is probably one of the biggest themes of the entire movie. He is much likely to go hunting for some deeper conspiracies than do meaningful stuff like building connections or solving his life problems, because the dude has no job. He's about to lose his apartment as well, but it's much more fun to go finding secret messages in songs.
Yeah, and this is a form of escapism in a way. Legend of Zelda, for example, is featured in the movie as one of the potential sources for the clues. And like, yeah, it's all about numbing yourself from the realities of the outside world with the escapist stuff, right? He's into music, very much into music. He's into video games, but not really, right? He doesn't seem to be super passionate about these things apart from music. He's also trying to find meaning and connection, not in the real world.
True. And he's surrounded by events that are too accidental to be a pattern, but he still tries to tie them together to make some meaning. And I'm going to quote the director of the movie twice because it is important. He was heavily criticized by how unlikable the protagonist is. Some viewers and critics apparently thought that this is a chauvinistic film, which I believe completely defeats the purpose, and this makes the story plot completely misunderstood.
It's the opposite, actually.
Yeah, so we're seeing this film through the eyes of a very unhealthy voyeur who is, he's objectifying women. He's doing things that go against the way that he's certainly not a role model. When you're a kid, people tell you that you can be whatever you want, and then you realize that's not necessarily true. Even being able to buy a house for our generation is like a near impossible task. So how do you process that? Maybe you go looking for meaning in strange places, end of quote. And then also he compares the point-and-click premise of old games like Maniac Mansion and the Monkey Island series, and then follows another quote, as the main character in the game, you assume that this object has a grand purpose. The truth is, sometimes it's completely meaningless, and sometimes it needs to be combined with something in order to unlock something deeper within the story. End of quote.
It has to be combined with something really unexpected and weird and sometimes dumb, like it was in the 90s and the 80s point-and-click adventures. And this is where the term moon logic comes from, right? You need to combine the rubber ducky with the toilet seat in order to create a grill for a hamburger. I don't know. And this is at one point, I feel like the story really highlights the absolutely unexpected, unrealistic, ludicrous sources from which Sam gets some of his clues. Like, it's not that super logical. It's kind of almost like a happenstance. Wikipedia says that this is a surrealist neo-noir movie. I would say it delves into magic realism very much because it is set in sort of our reality, but a lot of things are off. Right? At one point, and we're going to talk about this later when we encounter the character of a composer or a songwriter, right? Who says that, he wrote all the pop songs, all the songs that you rebelled at when you were a teenager, including also the Nirvana discography. It Smells Like Teen Spirit within the world, within the fiction of this movie was written by this guy, which is, of course, not true, right? We know that it's not the case.
But that's also funny because Nirvana is
Sam's most favorite band.
Exactly. And Nirvana is the one thing that gets you out of samsara.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, another hidden meaning, and I love it. I think this is a reverse side of nihilism. So if in nihilism nothing has meaning, this is a situation where everything has meaning. While I was preparing for the podcast, I found some pretty interesting stuff about how people fall prey to conspiracy theories. There was a research in 2008 by Whitson and Galinsky, and they found out that when individuals lack control, they're more likely to see images in noise, perceive conspiracies, and believe in supernatural force. Human brain is a pattern detection machine, and when life feels chaotic or unfair, people often leap to conspiracy explanations to connect the dots. And so they may serve a compensation function by restoring a sense of order and meaning. This is a quote by a Pulitzer Award winner, and he says, "In recent years, we have seen angry minds at work, mainly among extreme right-wingers, who have now demonstrated how much political leverage can be got out of the animosities and passions of a small minority. But behind this, I believe there is a style of mind that is far from new and that is not necessarily right-wing. I call it the paranoid style, simply because no other word adequately evokes the sense of heated exaggeration, suspiciousness, and conspiratorial fantasy that I have in mind." It is an article from 1964, and the article quotes examples of the same thing happening 50 years prior to that, 100 years prior to that, and 150 prior to that, with exact quotes and all this sort of stuff. And he gives McCarthy as an example, as a fresh example for his time, right? And then there's this interesting second part of the quote, which I think is crucial for understanding the logic of the main hero, is this demand for total triumph leads to the formulation of hopelessly unrealistic goals. And since these goals are not even remotely attainable, failure constantly heightens the paranoid sense of frustration. Even partial success leaves him with the same feeling of powerlessness with which he began, and this in turn only strengthens his awareness of the vast and terrifying quality of the enemy he opposes.
I think in the recent ContraPoints video about conspiracies and conspiracy theories, one of the points that was highlighted in this conspiratorial thinking is that there's ultimately a notion of absolute good versus an absolute evil. And of course, the forces behind the conspiracy which are being plotted are the absolute evil. And no matter what you do, it all should come down to the ultimate showdown of good versus evil. However, up until that point, everything else is going to be sort of futile and escaping you at every moment. It's very interesting. And again, yeah, I love how you mentioned that this was about the McCarthy era. A lot of things haven't really changed there, right? A lot of neuroscientists and psychologists do agree. I've seen this notion being repeated in many different places where people say that brains are meaning-making machines, right? We can't not make meaning.
Sure, because we are evolutionary wired to look for patterns and try to understand if a rumbling in the bushes is going to be your death or your dinner.
Exactly. And it's statistically it's safer to assume that it's going to be your death. It'd be kind of cautious.
Yeah.
Right.
And the thing is, how do you tell a real conspiracy from a fake one? Because real conspiracies do exist. Volkswagen conspired to cheat emission tests for their diesel engines, right? The US National Security Agency secretly spied on civilian internet users. The tobacco industry deceived the public about the harmful health effects of smoking. Actually, the same was done about the oil industry as well.
Yeah.
And we know about these conspiracies through internal industry documents and government investigations or whistleblowers. Conspiracy theories, by contrast, tend to persist for a long time, even when there is no decisive evidence for them.
This is a crucial question here, right? Because conspiracy theories, I feel like, inherently anti-materialistic. And when I say materialistic, I mean this in a philosophical sense, right? And if we're talking about materialism versus idealism, right? Materialism is a notion of the world being driven by material reality itself, physical, cause and effect kind of connections. Whereas idealism puts the immaterial, the ideas, the notions,
the power of spirit.
The power of spirit, it can take many forms. They take precedent over the material reality. In this case, religions are a form of idealistic thinking, because if you're thinking that Holy Spirit or whatever kind of spirit is controlling what is happening in the world, then you sort of put that on top of just physical reality and people's relationships and economic relationships and the systems, just pure societal systems that we're building, creating all of these situations that we find ourselves in. And so, yeah, I feel like Sam, in his pursuit of these signs and everything, is thinking like an idealist. I would say that his idealism comes in the form of single people influencing the culture and influencing the structures and everything much more than they actually do in real life. And I'm not saying that, Elon Musk or whatever doesn't have the power to influence the life on Earth tremendously. Oh, yes, they do, but not just because they're like a supernatural songwriter that can write all the songs for all the pop songs ever. It's because they're existing and are on top of real power structures and economical structures. They find themselves at the top of the pyramid of exploitation of many, 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 many different people below them. And so that's why I'm saying that Under the Silver Lake is a sort of a magic realist movie, because it sort of assumes that the conspiratorial thinking is sort of real. Yeah, it kind of
enables that a bit.
Yes, exactly.
We crave mystery because there's none left. This is a quote from his friend, Topher Grace, and it's time to talk about the man. Before starting the podcast, I decided to read the full script because the cinematography of the movie is really beautiful and has a lot of additional layers of meaning and conspiracy and symbols and what kind of t-shirts the characters dressed in, all sorts of Morse codes here and there. So it's pretty interesting. I do encourage everyone to go and watch it. But I wanted to see specifically how much of that was pre-planned in the movie script. And mind you, the script was made before the director shot It Follows. So
so this was his passion project.
Yeah, it definitely was. So the body of Sam, who is played by Topher Grace, in the script is described as a heavy man with a half-bald hat that goes to the same bar over and over again. Like, basically from the description, which Topher Grace, to be fair, completely does not match.
No, yeah, he's just a dude. Like
This is like this character who's also called Bar Buddy in the script. He's a complete loser. We don't know what his job is. We do know, however, that he spies with his drone on different girls when they get into their underwear. He's a creepy guy.
he is a creep, but like in the script, was he also spying with the drone?
Yes, he was.
Okay.
But there was a longer version of the dialogue about meaning that I believe was cut off from the script because we only see the shorter version.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes like this. So Sam says, I used to think I was going to be someone that other people cared about, maybe do something important. Bar Buddy. Shit, everybody thinks that, but the world cannot support it. Somebody has to sweep the floor. This fucked up idea that life owes us a goddamn good story is a bunch of crap. We're not all special and we're certainly not equal. That's the biggest lie ever. Sam, I just remember sitting in my room and making up my own weird little codes and secret language. It felt like there was so much mystery in the world, things to be figured out and solved. The bar buddy nods and he says, an entire generation of men obsessed with video games, secret codes, and space aliens. There's nothing that hasn't been explained away or solved by people and machines smarter than we'll ever be. Listen, 100 years ago, any idiot could wander into the woods and look behind a rock and find something new, but not now. Where is the thing that's never been seen, the mystery that makes it all worthwhile? Why do you think so many of us are out looking for the fucking Loch Ness monster, aliens, Bigfoot? We don't want to accept that we're useless. Even though we are, modern man needs mystery. We need to believe that there's something worth finding.
It's interesting that this was cut from the final movie because this is almost like one of the themes spelled out. And yeah, wow, this is very interesting. I feel like he's only partially correct in his assessment because there is the need for discovery, there is a need for creativity, there is a need for, pursuit for something bigger, greater, next step. And I feel like this need does live in a lot of us, if not all of us. But also I feel like the way that the current society is built and is maintained doesn't allow for expression of this, right?
I think there's a lot of disappointment that also maybe in the first place stems from economical conditions of how the society is ordered.
Absolutely.
And this economical frustration creates a lot of sexual frustration, which we're going to talk about next. Not only sexual, but also in different sorts of connections kind.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? If after teenage years, after childhood, you go into this real adult world, and all you get is, most of us get, is, if we're lucky, a 9 to 5.
No fun and a lot of debts.
Yeah, no fun, a lot of debts. And especially this is something that David himself mentioned in one of the quotes that you read, was that we can't really afford houses. Everything is so freaking expensive. It's shit. That's the thing. At some point, people in their 30s and even 20s right now, right? I think it becomes younger and younger. They look around and they're like, wait, is this all there is to life, right? This bullshit? The boss that I hate that skims all the cream out of my work? The underpaid shit? The debt, taxes, incredibly expensive healthcare, even if you're not living in the US, right? It's shit. And like if you're living in like overexploited countries, that's even worse than that, right?
Yeah.
It's awful.
It's even written in the script, in the description, which shows us how the author of the movie thought about it.
Yeah.
For example, this scene, wearing his white undershirt and pajama pants, Sam follows the coyote down the street, down Griffith Park Boulevard, past apartments and condos, in the hillside neighborhood, expensive homes, beautiful cars, things you cannot possess.
Wow.
And then also there's the scene where Sam is raving in one of the parties, and after the chorus, the realization hits him that he is if Peter Parker wasn't bitten by a spider, which is super ironic because he was a Peter Parker, right?
Yeah, Andrew Garfield played Spider-Man.
If Eduardo Severin never co-founded Facebook, and in his interview, Garfield agrees. He says it takes Sam the whole film to realize, I guess I'm not cut out for the shit. I guess I'm a failure. I guess I'm ordinary. I guess I'm not special, and I guess that's okay. So the whole story is about coming to terms with
your place in life,
which is a very sad thing to say because the place that Sam and people like him have in this Hollywood hierarchy is there's not much to it.
And yeah, there's not much to it, and it's not their fault that they were not born in a rich family. You know what I mean?
Oh, for
Like,
sure.
that's the
Yeah.
thing. But having said that, I don't want to lift all of the responsibility from the character of Sam, from Topher Grace's character, because they're also, how to say it, they're not doing a lot to escape their position, so to speak.
That's true. I thought they lack a lot of self awareness, especially in how they treat women. There's an entire theme of commodification of women in this
Oh, yeah.
movie. And the scene that we mentioned where Topher Grace spies with the drone on a beautiful model in her house, and Sam is also there to see that. What broke me internally is that during the scene when they watch her, the model actually starts crying. So
Yeah.
she's probably had a really terrible day. I don't know what happened to her, but she's clearly unhappy. But that does not spark any empathy in them. There is nothing behind the eyes. They're just watching her body. That's it.
And I feel like this again highlights one of the themes of the movie, this lack of connection, lack of community. People are just hanging around. They're atomized. They're just bouncing from, one place to another, one situationship to some party. And instead of talking to people and neighbors, and even between Sam and Topher Grace's character, there's not really that deep of a connection. They just hang around with each other.
Yeah.
I don't think they really care about each other. Like, even in some of their dialogue scenes, it seems like they're talking past each other. They're not actually engaging in a conversation. And yeah, the commodification of women is like one of the big ones here. And this was one of the most contentious topics for a lot of critics. We mentioned this before. Like, a lot of people think this is a misogynistic movie, a chauvinistic movie, which,
To me, it's so obvious that it critiques that.
yeah, this is like an internal conversation, right? Because a lot of people had conversations about Starship Troopers and the effectiveness of satire, how thin you can satirize something, how not blatantly you need to convey a message for it to be perceived correctly. Because a lot of people, when they first watched Starship Troopers, they thought of it as a cool sci-fi action movie and not like a fascist satire, right? Whereas there are all these other situations, like Showgirls, I would say, also was hugely misunderstood in the way that there's a very thin line in a lot of people's heads between portrayal and endorsement.
Yeah.
But here, if you watch how they're treating women and how, like, inside Sam's mind, I think there's a lot of animosity towards women in general. And this is like where we can draw parallels between this theme and the line of the dog killer that we mentioned before.
This is actually our next theme, death, errors, and sexual frustration. Before we jump into that, a bit of the story. Basically, the entire third act, Sam goes like from a party to a party, trying to find traces of Sarah and trying to understand what happened to her. And during one of those parties in the Hollywood Hills, Sam meets Jefferson Seven's daughter, Millicent. That was the billionaire who died in this car crash, allegedly with 3 women. Millicent, his daughter, convinces Sam to go swimming in the Silver Lake Reservoir, and she gives him a bracelet. It's an identical bracelet to the one Sarah had. Suddenly, she's shot dead by unseen assailants, and she sinks to the bottom of the lake, mirroring a pose from Sam's favorite issue of Playboy.
Yeah. And also, this is presumably what's pictured on the poster of the movie itself.
Yeah, correct. Sam, like you said, he actually goes through and figures out the conspiracy in popular songs. He was initially dead sad, thinking that like rich people are communicating their subliminal messages through pop songs, and so he finds a song, he actually decodes it, and there is a message like go to a certain place in the Hollywood Hills.
And this is something that I wanted to mention, is I think this is part of the idealistic thinking, because the question that is missing from here is why. Okay, if we even say that it's true that the rich and powerful of the world are communicating with each other through subliminal messages in music and pop culture and whatever, why can't they just pick a phone and call each other? You know what I mean? Write a DM on Twitter or whatever the hell.
It reminds me a lot about this movie with Russell Crowe and Paul Bettany. Paul Bettany is his imaginary friend.
Beautiful Mind.
Thank you. And yeah, just for the record, I'm really bad with names and titles. So in this movie, we can see how enthusiastic Russell Crowe's mind is about solving every single thing as if it was an algorithm. This is like, this is a necessity he has deeply ingrained in himself. He cannot do anything about this. And I think we all have this part in us to different degrees. And so he cracks the code in one of the songs. He goes to the place in Hollywood Hills and he's meeting the Hobo King. And Hobo King doesn't answer a lot of his questions, but he brings him to a place which is a labyrinth under the Hollywood Hills. And one of the paths through the labyrinth leads him to what looks like a half-done bomb shelter. So it's in progress. We see some new furniture still covered in film. And Sam is trying to understand what's going on. Maybe they're preparing for a new world war or something like that.
There were reports about a lot of rich people, a lot of performers, actors, singers, and so on, building such a shelters. I remember reading something about Beyonce's and Jesus.
Yeah, that they bought a house with a bomb shelter inside.
Yeah. So, not that far off from the reality. I think the real explanation of this is much more mundane. I think they are preparing for some sort of war, just in case. But you mentioned Hobo King, Homeless King. It's interesting that before that, Sam mentions that he hates homeless people.
Oh, yeah. So they're walking from the party to the reservoir, and there is a hobo guy in the street. He's asking for some cash, but he's very persistent about it, and he gets aggressive, and they're trying to get away from him as far as possible. But Sam has the audacity to say, I hate hobos. They're so dirty and so blah, blah, blah. Why do I say he has the audacity? Because he's like one day away from getting evicted. He's going to be the next one, and he still has no empathy. I think that this is something that so deeply misses from his character to be actually likable.
Yeah, like he is imagining himself, I would say, right? We don't know that exactly, but I think he's imagining himself as someone who is closer to the top of the societal pyramid as opposed to the bottom where the homeless people are.
Yeah.
Which is a self-delusion, right? It's very Randian in a way, like Ayn Rand. While you're imagining yourself as this Atlas kind of figure. You are the great, the big one. You're the millionaire who is temporarily in an unfortunate circumstance.
One step away from riches.
One step away from riches. It's still going to be fine. You'll get to this comfort and luxury and whatever the hell. And these hobos, they don't deserve your love. They don't deserve your compassion. And we have loads and loads of people in relatively comfortable positions, but still under heavy exploitation, feeling the need to justify that, these people, they're lazy, they're alcoholics, they were born this way, they're broken goods or whatever the hell, which is super inhumane, but also absolutely oblivious to the fact that this can happen to them as well.
Yeah. And so this theme, the next theme that we're talking about, is a pretty interesting combination of danger, sex, and the crazy things that the elite is capable of doing. It kind of reminds me of the movie with Tom Cruise, Eyes Wide Shut. There was also a lot of sexual frustration, a lot of danger. Maybe we're going to talk about this movie separately because I think it also perfectly works as a noir movie, and there's also a lot of conversations about conspiracies that may or may not be portrayed through this movie. So interesting stuff. I think this is the point where major story spoilers are happening, because at the end of his research, Sam finds out why these bomb shelters are made. He's meeting the guy who in the script is called Final Man. And the Final Man tells him about this ascension ritual.
And an important thing, he's meeting the Final Man in a sort of a bungalow with 3 other women.
Yeah, correct. It's actually a repeated motive.
What is the ritual?
The parts that I'm going to read right now are not from the movie. They are from the previous version of the script. So it's not been that much explained in the movie. But obviously, the ascension ritual is when a very rich man and 3 of his brides are being buried and sealed somewhere deep underground where they are supposedly to ascend to another plane of existence, which to me translates into they're going to die in like 6 months or so because they will run out of food, probably oxygen as well. So it's a miserable death, but they are absolutely keen that they are going to spend a holy eternal life like the ancient Egyptians did. And so this final man says that only the richest of men can afford this ceremony. I'm not even going to tell you how many people you have to kill for just one man and 3 women to reach the afterlife. And then he goes on to say the requirements for sacrifice are so specific: hair color, age, sex, tooth alignment, dietary habits, cancer formation. It takes a fortune and an army to catalog these people and kill them according to the ritual. It's expensive to build a tunnel system and keep it hidden, but it costs even more to murder people and not be harassed about it. That's a shame. The infrastructure, the management, the bribery, all in the name of something holy and pure.
I think this movie excels in portraying the absolutely disgustingly outwardly inhumane levels of wealth.
Insanity.
Yes, insanity that comes with this wealth that creates this complete and utter detachment of these people from the rest
True.
of the society, to the point that I feel like through reading this, and I don't think this comes across in the movie that much, but in this quote, I feel like the meaning-making desire, you see it still being prevalent in these detached billionaires as well, right? Because
Yeah,
they're
very true.
seeking ascension and afterlife and blah, 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 blah.
As if they didn't have enough in this life. Like,
Exactly. But also, they're not that different from Sam in a way, right? Because they're seeking something that isn't there to feed this insatiable hunger within them.
yeah. And this is kind of a tragic pre-ending of the story, is that by the time Sam reaches Sarah, she's already been sealed with 2 other brides and this super rich billionaire inside a tomb. Looks like they have the telephone connection, but he mentions that they had the two-side communication before, but people started panicking and it didn't end that well. So now they can only receive calls, not call someone. And before the call is through, he tells Sam, she's sealed, there's no other way out of it. So try to not make her sour about this decision. And it's a very sad point of the movie because she's pretty young and her other roommates as well. What had to happen to her to make this insane decision?
But yeah, and I feel like this can be said about a lot of things in real life, right? A lot of young people in general who are trying to make it in life, who are trying to have their breakthrough. They're chasing these they're chasing these goals within these power structures that are built by the wealthy. And this is a sacrifice that you have to make in order to get your next movie, or a sacrifice you have to make in order to be noticed by someone somewhere. You know, the system creates the need for these funneling mechanisms where only a select few can really make it, which is bullshit actually, right? Because in fact, if we're looking at this materialistically, and if we thought a little bit more about properly distributing resources and distributing opportunities and making so it's not just a single fucking Hollywood is the only place where you can make it in the movie industry in the US. If it was much more distributed, then it would be better for everyone. However, then it would create the situation when you don't have these fucking leeches, vampires, I would say, right? Profiting off this limited access to fame and fortune.
Yeah. It breaks my heart to think that in our world, such an attractive woman could have chosen to have her life last for only 6 months, but have it a nice life.
Yeah. They kind of know what they're going for, and it's sort of better than the alternative, which is, wander around aimlessly, being half a bum, seeking hidden meaning in songs and whatever the hell. So This is sort of the flip side of Sam's journey and Sam's choices.
And the third theme that I think is worth mentioning is this dog killer persona and gendered violence, and it kind of goes hand in hand in LA's dark lore. Obviously, LA is now being associated as this Babylon of movie making and legend making and stuff. It has a lot of dark stories as well, because creative personalities who are not getting seen, who are not getting financial support as just any other person, are very prone to depression, getting insane, especially with America's
non-existent healthcare system.
correct. I think the author of the movie is very much knowledgeable about Hollywood. It's pretty interesting. I just like to mention that the Silver Lake itself is called not because of the color, but because of the surname of the water commissioner from early 20th century called Silver. And the interesting fact is the prime real estate around the Silver Lake Reservoir was originally developed in the 1920s and 1930s by Daisy Canfield, wife of silent film star Antonio Moreno. Why I find it pretty interesting is because Dog Killer has something to do with the plot that is being discovered through this underground comics about a guy from the silent movie era who was very jealous and unfulfilled. He was particularly jealous to dog actors, and he commits a suicide during his audition, saying that nobody's going to be happy until all the dogs die under the Silver Lake. And there's a lot of animals in the movie. Actually, there were even more in the script. Certain parts were cut out. And animals, I'm pretty sure, serve as some sort of analogy. For example, I saw speculation that coyotes embody the aristocracy.
Interesting.
But more interestingly, I think about women that equal to bitches. And if we would say that nobody will be happy till all dogs die.
And that's the thing, like, we see numerous times throughout the movie how Sam views either like a fusion, like women barking in his like hallucinations or dreams. There is a point where he's trying to stalk one of the characters into the women's bathroom. She kicks him in the nuts. He lays down and some other women come in and they start being understandably upset about him being there. And in his mind, he starts hearing them as if they're not just arguing with him, but they're barking. And there are several moments like this. In one of his dreams, he actually, in fact, hears Sarah bark instead of talk to him. And this is like an ambiguous thing because throughout the movie, we're sort of led to believe that he might be a dog killer himself. And I think this is the theme that is sort of woven through all these other situations that we see in the movie. When Topher Grace and Sam are spying on this girl who's, breaking down crying. I think I saw a Letterboxd review a bit ago. One of the questions that reviewer asks, in the age of digital access to porn, which is absolutely free, why the fuck would you choose, right? Yeah. Why would you choose to pick a drone, pick a place, go there, blah, blah, blah. It's like, why do you do that? But I feel like it's, as with many real life warriors and creeps, it's about control and power that you're exerting.
Yeah, because porn is still consensual.
Hopefully, yeah. Yeah. And whereas there's a point of non-consent, of dehumanizing the
There's
other
a violence.
There's violence, absolutely. And I feel like this dehumanization fires back at Sam because he doesn't have an authentic relationship in his life. He doesn't have a proper, meaningful relationship with a girlfriend. They just have some sex occasionally, and that's pretty much it. She seems to care about him much more than he cares about her in the movie. And he sort of creates this idea of Sarah as a perfect girl, essentially, that he's trying to chase, while everywhere else, his relationship with other women is kind of
transactional, I would say, yeah.
Transactional, yeah.
On one hand, when we're talking about dog killer, I think it's important to note that in noir, there's usually this subplot of the protagonist having some dark background or something quite unpleasant about him, some dark truth, which I think the movie tunes into nicely. On the other hand, we do know from the author's interviews that he himself does not know, and it's not that important whether the main character is or is not the dog killer. So, for example, Andrew Garfield said that he would do different takes depending on whether he thought he was a dog killer, he suspected he was a dog killer, or he was sure he wasn't. At the same time, there's like a lot of evidence going around Sam's persona that may point that he might be the one. Yeah. The interesting thing, though, two interesting points. First one, he doesn't seem to be very interested in finding out who the dog killer is. It's like as if there was like a serial killer wandering through your neighborhood, but you would give zero fucks about this.
Yeah,
Which to
and
me is surprising, but maybe also is tightly connected to his lack of empathy.
yeah,
And the other thing which quite interested me when I was looking through the script is how girls and his relationship to just stranger girls is described. So, for example, this is from the opening scene. Sam stares at one of the shop's many attractive tattooed bakery girls as she smiles to another customer. He glances over and spies two other bakery girls in a private conversation near the espresso machine. Chatter, 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 chatter. So many unknowable things wrapped in beauty. And the other one is about Sarah's appearance. So, Sarah looks like a Midwestern Monica Vitti with a hint of Sharon Tate. A sex that induces an almost guttural reaction in any man or woman within proximity, but the girl seems unaware of her power.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's fascinating. I haven't read the script, but I feel like Riley Keough very much does embody this exact description, which is interesting.
If you are unfamiliar with Riley Keough, she is actually the eldest granddaughter of Elvis Presley.
Yeah.
I think this is a very interesting point where we see something that Mitchell, the director of the film, has maybe internalized about Hollywood is this attitude towards women. Not that he has it himself, but more like how Hollywood
he
treats women.
describes it,
Yeah,
right? He
that
illustrates it through
that
the
Hollywood is trying to cage and crush women. And now, as more and more information surfaces about, for example, Didi's parties, apparently everyone at Hollywood knew about Didi's parties. Nobody did
Fucking
anything.
hell, yeah. And Weinstein before that.
Yeah. And I found it also interesting that in his interview, he said that he wrote the script in 2012 and he kind of set it aside. This is a quote, but I had felt that this was something we should put out as soon as possible, in the sense that there was a feeling as I was writing it of a shadow rising. That's a feeling within the film.
Masterfully sad.
And on a more practical level, I think the dog killer and the dogs dying also have a quite literal meaning because dogs die when girls disappear. They cannot take it to the shelter themselves. I find it very interesting that no character from the movie caught it, and there was very little speculation about it from the audience, is that usually a death of a dog means there is a girl who has disappeared as well. But nobody seems to pay attention that the girls are disappearing. And there's probably streaming more into whether Sam is or is not a dog killer. There's an interesting part of a script that was also cut off, is where Pogo, Barbuddy's golden retriever, walks up to Sam through the grass. The dog licks his hand and arm, but Sam pulls away, a fake smile forming. Barbuddy notices that and tugs gently on the dog's collar. I think that may not be like crucial evidence that he's definitely the dog killer, but more like he's lacking empathy not only towards women or other individuals, but even towards animals.
It's interesting that before spending time with Sarah, he meets with her dog and he has some treats for the dog, even though he himself doesn't have any dogs.
Yeah, that's
right?
very suspicious.
And then, of course, like the conversation with the Hobo King, I think, right? He talks about having treats as a reminder about his former girlfriend's dog, right? He had a breakup, apparently, from his words, and the girlfriend had a dog, and he sort of remembers the dog more fondly than the girlfriend. So this is like a reminder and so on and so forth. I don't know how convincing this is. And again, like you mentioned, it doesn't matter that much ultimately. I think this whole storyline is there to point at the theme more than, that. But also, if we assume that Sam is a dog killer and like combining with all the different activities that he does throughout the movie, he is ultimately not a very pleasant guy, to put it mildly, right? He's not the best one. He can be charming at times, and, I think Andrew Garfield...
he's a brilliant cast.
An amazing cast, right? Because he can be very charismatic. I didn't know about the Peter Parker but not bitten. It's a perfect description. He can be kind of goofy, but, yeah. But underneath all that, he's very unpleasant because of his antisocial sort of tendencies. He's very non-committal and again avoidant and inside himself. I also like this movie being written in 2012 and being shot much later. I see a lot of intersection with weird online communities, right, where you see people, usually it's young men, being piped into this sort of pipeline that is about suppressing emotions, treating others really harshly and unapologetically, grinding for success and being really singular and being captured into these sort of false narratives about success and about relationships and about meaning as well. That's why you see a lot of intersection between like the manosphere, the Andrew Tate fans, and then QAnon, for example, right? And then a lot of guys in the 4chan, and not even 4chan, just now Twitter sort of converted to that space as well, wholesale. And there's a lot of this sort of nastiness bubbling inside. And I think Sam is actually a very interesting portrait of an archetype from this sphere.
I absolutely agree. I think this is one of the things that the movie does so brilliantly, is showing the internal logic and the roots of somebody who would maybe in a couple of years become a 4chan user or like a QAnon participant without being too on the nose, and how this drive for righteousness, because it feels good to be the one pursuing the truth and saving the girl. It feels good to belong to somebody else who also like sees through the decoded meaning. It kind of makes you belong in a life where you struggle to make connections or find meaning. So I think it is a very honest exploration of the topic without doing it in a very bold way.
It's not preachy also.
Yeah. So it's very nice because this guy is not even chronically online. We never see him, type anything.
No, yeah, and that's actually, I feel like, is also a good point. It's not about saying, oh, 4chan is bad. No, it's about exploring the psychology, like you said.
Yeah.
And I also agree that this is very successful in this regard.
There's one thing that I'd like to talk about before we go into discussing the finale of the movie. One of the things that this author of the comics shows Sam is the history of Hollywood's sexualization of ads. And this is a real thing, so it's not a conspiracy. It actually, you can look it up. There's a lot of innuendos trying to grab more attention in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And like even modern times are not that different, right? Because if you show big boobs on the screen, it definitely will grab more attention than anything else.
And I feel like there is an interesting and contradictory relationship between us as a society gaining more sexual freedom, being more comfortable with our sexuality, which is part of life, right? Sex is part of life, and physicality is part of life, and the way that we also find meaning and beauty in human form and various different aspects. And suppressing all of that isn't very healthy.
But a great opportunity to capitalize on that.
Absolutely, because now you have the other end of this, the exploitative end of this.
And so the theme was the scene with the songwriter.
Yeah, so like the hidden meaning, at one point Sam's find another clue in the song, and like this old, I think it was during the Satanic Panic or something in the US, there were conspiracies about hidden satanic messages hidden in the...
Was that the one connected to the D&D?
Oh, I mean, there were several.
Or it never ended.
It was connected to various different things. So D&D was one of them, but also heavy metal was also that. And there were conspiracies about if you slow the song down and put it in reverse, then you'll find like Hail Satan messages or whatever, subliminal messages that...
Funnily enough, this is exactly what Sam did in the movie.
Exactly. And I feel like it's just a direct reference to that. And there is a question of who puts these messages in there, right? I remember Sam at one point interrogates the singer of Dracula and his bride. The bride.
He's actually Jesus, so this is his
pseudonym.
Moniker.
Yeah, he's pseudonym. He goes by the name Jesus.
It also is funny because he's asking Jesus, and Jesus has literally no answers to his questions. Like he doesn't know either.
He slaps the shit out of Jesus and in some sort of bathroom, I think.
Yeah.
And he asks, like, why did you put the secret message in there? What does it mean?
He said, I didn't.
This was a song that was just sent to us.
By the label.
By the label, yeah. And they said, play it to us. And this is how Sam discovers that there's this songwriter.
When he asks which songs were sent by the label, he finds out from Jesus that these were the best songs from the entire album.
The
So
singles, right?
The guy did not write it himself.
Yeah, which is super ironic, right? And also a real practice. What's Selena Gomez new Benny Blanco, right? The musical producer who wrote and produced a bunch of great pop hits.
Yeah, he's super successful, and we actually know about other behind the scenes figures, and this is another thing where a conspiracy may not be a conspiracy, because we know about Max Martin and Greg Alexander. They really do exist, and these guys wrote like top hits of 2000s.
And a lot of them did stuff in the 90s, but like it's not like it's just a single guy writing all of the stuff in real life.
It's more like a unified symbol, a representation of this kind of person, I guess.
Yeah. Why I mentioned Benny Blanco is because, for example, he produced Diamonds, right, for Rihanna, which was initially produced for Sia. And I actually heard the demo for Sia's performance of Diamonds, and it does sound like a Sia song. But it's also very interesting. We think about creatives and we think about singers and songwriters as artists, as someone with something to say, something to express. And when you have these vocalists who are handed the songs, being like, here, you have a good voice, here's a good material, sing this material, now we have a hit. This seems very manufactured, at least to me, right? It feels very inauthentic in and of itself, right? It's not a form of self-expression for an artist, it's just a conveyor belt. And so, yeah, Sam ends up finding this half-mythical songwriter, which I think he's not even named. I think he's just the singer.
Yeah, he's a pretty old dude.
He's like super old. They have like an old man's makeup, and he looks like there was a movie like with John Candy and Demi Moore, Whole Lot of Trouble, I think it was called, or something. That Dan Aykroyd was playing like multiple roles, and Dan Aykroyd played like this horrible, disgusting judge, and he had like a penis for a nose.
No.
Yeah, it was like awful. And this guy reminds me very much. It's as if he was pulled from that movie. Like this makeup, and he's like an old guy, and he was saying something along the lines of he was playing different music on the piano. He was like, the music that inspired you, that you were rebelling to in your teen years, like smells like Teen Spirit and stuff. I wrote it between a breakfast and a wank, right? Essentially, in the morning. Like, it's nothing for him. This is like used tissue.
I think there was even a deeper tone to the used tissue, is that it was a recycled used tissue.
Recycled used tissue, exactly. Yes, and it's like for Sam, for Andrew Garfield's character, it meant a lot, right? And Nirvana was super inspiring for him, and we see it throughout the movie. But then he sort of finds out that it was nothing. There was no inherent meaning. There was no real expression, no authenticity behind this. And it crushes him. He holds a guitar, allegedly a Kurt Cobain's guitar, there standing like in front of the songwriter. He holds it. He's looking at it in total disbelief.
This means that all the rebellion was manufactured by just a music label.
Exactly. Yeah, there was nothing to it. There was no authenticity.
It was a sellout from the beginning.
It was a sellout from the beginning. Exactly. In the real life, we know that it wasn't like that specifically. However, we see it in a broader way the industry operates. So Kurt Cobain specifically wasn't a sellout. However, they obtained great fame and were incredibly influential along with many other different bands in the grunge scene. But then after Kurt Cobain and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden, it came the time of post-grunge, which was much more sanitized, commercialized, pop-oriented, no political messages, very little in terms of personal messages, and so on and so forth. You see this wave of bands that sounded kind of like the grunge, but it was almost like a Skinwalker, almost like a fake, body snatcher kind of situation.
Yeah.
And I feel like this illustrates the way that commodification of art, commercialization of art, can't not influence the message. It's impossible for it not to impact the spirit, the messages, the themes of art in a detrimental way.
Yeah, true.
And there's one other thing related to this whole scene and to this whole theme. Bear with me. I know people online who can be very much into these finding meaning and deeper authenticity and connection and tenderness in big budget blockbuster slop. A new Star Wars movie comes out and people seek out nuggets of tenderness and authenticity and themes and again, rebellion. They say Last Jedi was left wing or whatever the hell. It's funny to say this after we did some stuff about Andor, but I feel like there's a difference here. People looking at the Marvel movies and they're trying to seek, like, oh yeah, there are these little hints of human condition and drama and all that, which are disappearingly rare in products like this because these are products and they most often designed to be, well, as inoffensive as possible. They saw off all the rough edges and all the angles and all of that. This is like an amorphous blob of something that is there to provoke your immediate emotional response, but don't really have anything deeper to say. And it's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is just military propaganda. And I feel like the scene with the composer, with the songwriter, also highlights that in a way. There is an inherent emptiness to this commercialized art, and it's on Sam to delude himself into finding deeper meaning into that, whereas there's none.
That's why I think the ending of the movie is really, really beautiful, because after all his adventures, Sam returns home and he actually spends the night with a neighbor. And neighbor's parrot throughout the movie is constantly saying something that everyone is trying to understand what exactly it's saying. So the parrot again repeats incomprehensible words, and this time Sam stops himself from pursuing, oh, I need to find out what he's saying. And at the same time, from the balcony of his neighbor, Sam watches as his landlord and the police enter his apartment to evict him, and they notice one of his walls has been painted with this strange symbol that he saw earlier, and Sam knows that this is a symbol that says to stay quiet. So I think he finds willpower to stop chasing additional meaning and maybe make something out of his life right now. Maybe.
It's interesting. And I want to also note that his neighbor is an older woman. I think actually the only older woman in the whole cast.
Yeah, but she's constantly appearing topless, which is also an interesting thing.
Yeah, I read her because of her environment and her age and her other clothing and interior and stuff. I read her as a sort of like hippie or a former hippie.
But I would say she's hardly in the late 40s.
I'm not saying that she was from the original movement. I was more like she's there to represent this kind of archetype, right? Like a hippie-ish, free love, whatever. Like, of course, he is spying on her before that as well. Don't get me wrong. But she's not undressing herself for any movie producer or anything. She's not getting a role. She's not like... She's there just because she feels like I'm too lazy to put on something to get and feed my parrot or whatever the hell. Of course, I'm assuming here, but I feel like there is contrast as opposed to all these other women, all these other female characters in the movie here. So yeah, he ends up just hooking up with her. I actually don't see a lot of hopefulness there, to be honest. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe because, yeah, if he actively stops from deciphering another hidden message, maybe
that's also the result of, if you fuck around and find out, maybe what you find out is not necessarily what you wanted to know. And there is a certain disappointment in how this entire conspiracy theory line ended for him twice, with the songwriter and then with Sarah as well.
Yeah.
So he got the answers, but he's pretty disappointed still. So maybe he should stop walking around because he does not want to find out eventually.
Oh, yeah. And what are the antidotes to his condition? Like, what can he do better? I think he needs to start engaging with people. He needs to start listening to people and being part of some community.
He definitely needs to do something with the lack of empathy he has, because this is dangerous. This is something I read about, that the conspiracy theorists, they actually strive to have knowledge, but a very specific kind, the knowledge that would make their position look more researched and powerful.
Confirmation bias.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think curiosity and trying to be knowledgeable is a good thing, but when you understand where you need to stop, you need to go off of certain evidence to understand whether it's a real conspiracy or an imaginary one.
Materialistic approach, verifiable evidence, not just assuming like the worst. I think scientific approach in general is a benefit
Exactly.
here.
What these people usually lack is an understanding that if there's no evidence to support certain conspiracy theory, for them it means the evidence hasn't just been found, somebody's covering it.
Yes, this is like a backwards approach, right? Of course, you have a theory. At the very beginning, you have a hypothesis, right? You have a hypothesis and you need to confirm it or disprove it. And that's how you need to go through various different sources of information. You need to gauge the source's reliability. You need to factor many different things. And also, that's the thing, if you've heard a piece of information from only one source, it would be great to confirm it someplace else. And then also not forget about self-reflection, because you need to also doubt yourself, being like, okay, wait a second, is this correct? Did I assume it correct? Is my framing
has like a biblical lack of self-awareness.
Absolutely.
Completely.
Yeah. And it's interesting how the movie shows us all these different wacky characters. We're, of course, not talking about each and every one of them. Again, we recommend you watch this movie by yourself. But we go through all these wacky situations, interesting characters. We go all over the place in LA. And the final discoveries, like you said, quite unsatisfactory to our main character, even though they create for an interesting story. And I feel like this is a third movie in what I would call a stoner noir genre, which I would also include The Big Lebowski and Inherent Vice. And it was interesting. I revisited Inherent Vice recently while preparing for this conversation. And Inherent Vice is a movie from 2014 or 2013, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, starring Joaquin Phoenix. Amazingly acted, very interesting. It's also like a noir thing. 1970s, LA, you have a private investigator called Doc, who one evening is visited by his ex-girlfriend, who, interestingly enough, has a relationship with a billionaire mogul.
Oh.
Yeah. And she asks him to look into a potential case of the wife of the mogul with her lover plotting against him. So making sure that the mogul would disappear, right? And there's like some construction involved, and money, and all of these things. And so we see Doc sort of going all over LA, interacting with Black Panther and then Nazis and then the cop who is also a movie star, or at least he's like an inspiring movie star, right? He wants to act into a commercial. He's played by Josh Brolin. You have all these sort of weird, wacky characters. It starts to become extremely convoluted extremely quickly. And it has like an unsatisfying conclusion in a way, right? The conclusion to the movie is much less convoluted than the whole thing that was before that. But I saw a lot of interesting parallels with Under the Silver Lake in terms of the general tone, the wackiness. I feel like Under the Silver Lake is much more coherent in a lot of its themes and its plotting. But it was also funny to hear that they share at the very least one song in their soundtrack, both.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, Never My Love, that's the name of the song. Inherent Vice was an adaptation of a book by Thomas Pynchon of the same name. Inherent Vice doesn't have the magic realist angle, but it has a lot of sort of wackiness, kind of similar to The Big Lebowski. But The Big Lebowski, I would say, is the most outright comedy out of all of them.
Yeah.
All of these three movies, also extremely horny. Very horny, I would say. But horny in a different way, placing all of them in LA and in such close proximity to Hollywood and to this industry that preys on youth, on beauty, and on leeching all of the life force out of these people, I think makes it for a very interesting backdrop and very interesting sort of almost like a triad of movies, which I recommend watching all of them, even though The Big Lebowski and Under the Silver Lake are my favorites. But still, I feel like thematically they tie together in some places in interesting ways.
That's very nice. I would wrap up with the conclusion that usually it's either you get the vibe right or you get the story right. And there are not that many movies that combine the two so nicely together, because I had my experience with LA. LA was actually the first city that I visited in the US.
All right.
And I managed to get lost at night in the Hollywood Hills.
Just like Sam.
The short story was that me and my colleague decided to go on a hike. We started like a couple of hours before the sunset, so we wanted to see the sunset from around the Hollywood sign. It was very fine. And then our phones died, so we had no internet, no phones,
Oh,
and
no.
no map. We had to figure out how to go back, and we ended up just getting in circles through these mansion districts. And the most horrifying part was that on one hand, there were coyotes around us all the time,
Oh,
so we
no.
saw them howl. And on
No.
the other one was that it was such a labyrinth because all of the houses, like they have even clusters of those, and they're fenced, so there is no straightforward road to get to or see from wherever you are. And it was very hard to get away from that. Even though it was a beautiful starry night, it was a really warm night at some point. But basically, many hours later, we just stumbled a fence that was open, so we managed to go through, praying that we wouldn't be shot on sight
Oh, no.
trespassing. And so we just happened to stumble upon some sort of supermarket. I was very thirsty, so I went into the supermarket, and a bottle of water cost like $10 for 500 milligrams.
Go away.
And I was
No.
like, for fuck's sake. But I had to buy it. So we split the bottle of water, and we wanted to find a place to call a taxi to go to our hotel.
Yeah.
And somehow, very fast, through this like bushes and like half of the forest, the wild forest with coyotes, we ended up being on the Hall of Fame. And
the Walk of Fame.
yeah, the Walk of Fame, and right in front of the Scientology church.
Ah.
So basically, Scientologists were the first people after the guy who worked in the shop to talk to us. And we were running from, I don't know, kidnappers through the entire forest. So we were dirty, very sweaty.
Well,
very tired.
You looked very authentic, I would say.
Yeah,
for
very.
the late, yeah.
So yeah, I think at this point we were looking like two hobos, even though my colleague was actually the CEO of the company. And this was the place where we managed to catch a taxi and go to the hotel. Yeah.
Amazing. Did you find any bunkers?
I mean, it was dark, so I wouldn't be able to tell.
Yeah, sure. And you lived there, you stayed in Santa Monica, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So you had to
get... pretty close to the beach.
Yeah, interesting. So here we go. Under the Silver Lake. I think it's a great movie, a misunderstood movie. It also might not be the most comfortable watch because there are...
serious topics.
Yeah, serious topics. Not the easiest one, but still, I highly recommend it.
Yep.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting our project on Patreon at patreon.com/borzoicast, where you can enjoy ad-free episodes and bonus content. That's patreon.com/borzoicast.